Hello. So I greet you very warm-heartedly for the fourth panel of our International Schiller Institute conference. And the topic of this panel is the principles on which the new security and development architecture, the new paradigm, must be built. And I think, the discussion, especially in actually all three panels, but especially the last panel, made very clear that, given the extraordinary circumstances in which mankind finds itself, the enormous pressures in the last panel, the question of hunger, food, the need to keep the economy functioning. Nevertheless, it's not so easy to find a cohesion among all these different interests. And that is why I think this discussion about the principles on which the new paradigm must be built is extremely important. And actually, when I thought about it last November, when I proposed these principles, it was clear to me that it would not be enough to just have programmatic points. I think these programmatic points, in one sense, are the most easy to agree upon because, this is what everybody encounters, the need to have sovereignty, because without sovereignty, the individual cannot participate in the government, the urgent needs of mankind to overcome hunger, poverty, to create a modern health system in every country, to have access to universal education, to have a credit system which can finance all of that, to have the necessary infrastructure in every continent, to deal with the actual security architecture. All of these things are difficult, but they are manageable, provided one has more fundamental philosophical principles on which different representatives of different countries can agree upon. And I think that is the one thing which is mostly lacking, because I have not seen any forum which addresses that from a scientific standpoint to actually solve it. And I think the Schiller Institute there has a special role because our whole organization and our whole movement and the principles of us working as an international think tank are very much influenced by the method of, on the one side, naturally, Lyndon LaRouche, who has developed a very unique scientific economic method, physical economy. But we are also obviously taking as a resource the methods of thinking which have been developed by other great philosophers in history, like Nicolaus of Cues, Leibniz, Friedrich Schiller, Confucius, Plato, and several others. And I think that is what we should discuss in this fourth panel, because, to work out principles which give you the key to overcome tensions among nations, which come from, both historical experiences, different cultures, different understandings, to even communicate with each other in the right way when you have completely different backgrounds in terms of tradition and culture. And that is why, for example, I think Nicolaus of Cusa, the great thinker of the 15th century, made a very, very valid observation when he said the only reason why representatives of different nations and different cultures can even communicate with each other is because they all have wise men and women, naturally, artists, musicians, mathematicians, people who understand universal principles in science and in art. And once you agree on these universal principles, which are called universal because they apply everywhere, otherwise they would not be universal, that is why even if people come from different cultures, can actually establish a common ground. So what we will attempt to do in this fourth panel is to establish at least an approximation so that people get an idea why these principles are so absolutely important. And that gives me the opportunity to announce our first speaker who gives the keynote in this panel, who is Jacques Cheminade, a 3 times presidential candidate of France, president of the party Solidarité et Progrès, and one of the great philosophers of our time. Jacques, please go ahead.
The power of labor for a moment of epochal change. To mobilize the power of labor, of human labor, is our immediate challenge to build a new architecture of security and development for all of us. Both the nations of the global majority of the world and the peoples in the Western section claim the existential immediate necessity to succeed. To succeed. This is the real sense of us demonstrating in the streets of Europe. In contrast, our financial elites of the global north are pursuing a policy of social war against their own peoples and of rearmament against the nations who are seen as the enemies, the nations that resist them. Their policy is a danger for all. Facing the crisis of their predatory financial system, they are like wounded tigers that become man-eaters. Against them, our decisive weapon is our image of man, that man is characteristically good. The accomplishments of human labor embody and prove our creative powers. Nonetheless, the oligarchical elites try by all means to reduce labor to a balance of power within their established environment, predefined by the rule of money and pricing. The purpose of my intervention is therefore to contribute to free the power of human labor. First, it is human because it's neither bestial nor mechanistic. To be physically exploited in a coltan or gold mine is not human labor. It is colonial slavery. Human labor consists in physically transforming nature for a useful social purpose and not to perform a task to get a retribution. The work of a human being develops and broadens its creative powers. It is not something in itself. It is a contribution to our common good for the social future. Labor is a human right to develop, not a prize. But to say this is not enough. The necessary philosophical foundations for a new paradigm demand a much deeper implementation, a much deeper investigation into what it is human, on what is human. The best reference that I could find is a set of presentations given by Lyndon LaRouche on the powers of labor, natural law, and technological progress on April 25, 1984. LaRouche starts by the need to increase the potential relative population density of a society to avoid its doom. Potential means above the level of the present population. It is the discovery of new physical principles and their application to foster technological progress that increase the productive powers of labor per human being and per land area. Because there is this special quality in mankind to improve its environment and increase the energy flux density and the carrying capacity of its universe. Look now at the present state of our transatlantic system, our transatlantic universe. It is potentially doomed. It has destroyed its potential under the rule of a financial oligarchy which issues more and more money without creating, and now destroying, real physical growth Politically, therefore, the essence of our fight is clear. But let's make a step ahead with Lyndon LaRouche. An animal or an oligarch can't transform its environment for the best. We are going to see that an artificial intelligence processes data better than humans, but does not transform. Human labor can, because it hypothesizes. It has the power to transform and create a better universe by changing the rules of the game, economically, culturally, and socially. It breaks through the given constraints. LaRouche defines 3 levels of hypothesis that makes human labor uniquely human. Simple hypotheses are compatible with existing axioms and hypotheses, so to say, they discover along the way. Higher hypotheses overthrow existing axioms and postulates of accepted scientific or other opinion. It is a kind of thinking that reconstructs all scientific discoveries, opens the way to the discovery of new physical principles applied under the form of technological progresses that potentially every human being has the power to understand and apply socially because he or she is human. It is a social implementation which is the power of human labor to increase the relative potential population density. The hypothesis of the higher hypothesis is a principle which efficiently generates successive scientific revolutions. It is a domain that Vladimir Vernadsky calls the noosphere, the power of human labor to become a geological force that shapes the earth in coherence with the laws of the physical universe. Let's now make one more step ahead. The so-called revolution of artificial intelligence. AI processes data and establishes logical correlations, learning to induce and deduce in domains with an enormous but finite number of cases. It doesn't know what it is really doing physically. It is not self-conscious. True, it can win over a human rival in the chess or Go games. It did it, it's logic. But it can't proceed in the domain of physically discontinuous processes, creative human labor. It amounts to a very sophisticated statistical model quantifying correlations between space scales and of value. For AI, a metaphor, a change of meaning from a level of thinking to a higher one is like for a chicken which wants a piece of clay. AI cannot reach a level of high hypothesis. This means that AI can process better than human beings what is not human, the boring domain of data. Machine learning and deep learning affords it to explore what is already known and usefully proceed in that domain of the already known. But never metaphors, never a new physical principle. In that sense, whereas LaRouche said that Monet is an idiot, AI is another one. An idiota senza mente, a data analyst servant under electronic steroids. Good news or bad news? It is a matter of intention. Very bad news if the AI is left in the hands of those who try to eradicate creative human thinking with a more sophisticated level to control human behavior, the oligarchical game to train humans not to be humans, to be non-humans, destroying human labor through the algorithmic control of images, fake news, and financial operations. In that sense, the true enemy of human knowledge and labor is not ignorance, but as Socrates knew, it is the illusion to know. Very good news. Now, if IA is under the control of the power of human labor, AI is a very useful helper not only to accomplish time-consuming tasks, but also to proceed by itself in a domain of known logical relations. For example, it takes more than half an hour both ways to communicate with a rover on planet Mars. AI can train the engine to face everything that could be expected, except if an unexpected, illogical event happens, an unknown. Very useful, limited but very useful. True, AI is going to replace many jobs accomplished by human beings, but those jobs are not human creative labor, mainly white-shirt bureaucratic jobs such as strategic consultants, the McKinseys, traders, lawyers, PowerPoint experts, all the imposters that pretend to master the rules of the game are in fact profiteers. If we control the domain of the AI, our work is going to be necessarily and happily, I must say, human, because our mindless assistant is going to accomplish the non-creative work. The decisive political issue is then who controls credit, who controls the process of creation, and for what purpose. There is more to say. The consciousness that our labor is truly human is the key point. I have not enough time to go into it, so I would simply advise you to read Nicolaus von Kues, the best philosophical friend of Helga Zepp-LaRouche. Just a word. In De Berillo in 1458, among other works, he teaches us the true way of human knowledge freed from the Aristotelian principle of non-contradiction, to enter instead the domain of the intellect beyond that of reason, the domain where the human mind conceives the coincidence of the opposites and becomes capable to reach a higher level of action. The metaphor for this creative insight into what he later called posse ipsum, the power itself. The metaphor, Kusa's metaphor, is a beryl, a semi-precious stone with which spectacles were cut in his times. Human eyes would thus be equipped with intellectual beryl that would allow the human mind to grasp the coincidence of the opposite. Such is a metaphor. Today, Helga Zepp-LaRouche applies this approach to the solution of human conflicts, to get out from above of the destructive logic of blocks against blocks. It is thus from within our minds, and by listening to the minds of others, in the spirit of the Peace of Westphalia, 1648. It is in that way that creative human work establishes a roadmap to get out of the dilemma. This is its very nature at its highest level, that of insight, of creative intuition, carrying a dynamic of peace, not from data gathered in the form of plans, but from principles generating the power of human labor. Our 10 principles of the Schiller Institute. The shift of the world today is the best opportunity for all of us to become actors of this change for the best. Let me finish with a quote from Bernard Riemann on the concept of Geistesmasse. The mind is a compact cognitive mass, Geistesmasse, multiply connected by the most intimate internal connections. It creates continuously as new cognitive masses enter it, and in this way, it continues to develop. It is thus a contribution of new ideas that resonates and stimulates the whole of our knowledge. Helga Zepp-LaRouche and my wife Odile have explored Johann Friedrich Herbart's contribution to the pedagogy of creative ideas to create the soul of the student, and not to format it, as is the case very often today. Human work is experimentation, the experimentation of this permanent progress, of which the whole life of humanity and the best of ours brings the experimental proof, the historical proof. This is what is threatened today, immediately threatened today by war and economic chaos. Let us become more aware of it. Let us move about it. Let us mobilize more humans to work to reverse the flow in our transatlantic part of the world and bring opposites together. It is a matter of life and death. The power of human work must inspire us to think in terms of metaphors and to develop hypotheses beyond the sensory experience that today, left to its own logic, to the logic of this sensory experience, would make us pessimistic and therefore powerless. Let's follow the advice of Lyndon LaRouche when he was asked the secret of his creativity: work, work. The decisive moment of history that we are living requires from us the full mobilization of our human creative work, so that our great moment of history falls due to greater people. Thank you.
Thank you, Jacques. I think that what you address is the creative potential of human beings, and actually that fact is one of the major reasons why we should be optimistic, because I believe that Leibniz indeed was right when he said that we are living in the best of all possible worlds, because a great evil always can be overcome with an even greater good. Now, one area of the world where we see that principle working is actually Southwest Asia, and today we have, not by accident, several speakers who address the recent breakthrough which occurred because of the diplomatic rapprochement between Saudi Arabia and Iran, and that indeed overcomes one of these conflicts which have been in existence since at least the Sykes-Picot treaty, and that has been resolved now. At least it's on a very good way to do so. So let me introduce to this subject our first speaker, who is Dr. Chandra Mustafa, who is a long-time acquaintance and even friend of the Schiller Institute. And he is the president and founder of an international organization called Just International. And he will speak on the subject, the importance of the Chinese and Russian engagement in Southwest Asia and the world. Dr. Chandra Mustafa, please go ahead.
Peace be with you. The agreement reached between Saudi Arabia and Iran through the efforts of the Chinese government could well be a turning point in global politics, a turning point in international relations. We know that all the three parties involved, the Chinese government, Saudi government, the Iranian government, they've started implementing this accord. There have been meetings in Tehran, in Riyadh, in Beijing. What they're trying to do now is to implement some of the major dimensions of this decision that has been made. It is significant because it would mean that the animosity between these two very important nations in the Muslim world, Iran and Saudi Arabia, may subside. And if this change takes place, there is a certain degree of understanding that develops, then I think it will impact upon a huge segment of the Muslim world because of the importance of these two nations. And there are proxy wars, semi-proxy wars in a number of countries in the Arab world, and even outside the Arab world, which are linked to Saudi Arabia and Iran. It may also decrease. And there may be some attempt to establish closer links between countries like Saudi Arabia and Syria, between Syria and Turkey, between Lebanon and Saudi Arabia. These things may happen. We don't know. But there is that possibility. It is also possible that eventually this rapprochement engineered by China could lead to a better understanding within that whole region of the relations between Israel and the Arab world, Palestinians in particular. That may happen. We don't know. There are these possibilities. There hasn't been any moment in recent history in West Asia and North Africa that has been more hopeful in terms of creating an atmosphere of understanding, of amity amongst the different nations. But it's not just China. I think we have to look at what has happened in terms of yet another big power, that this is Russia. Like China, Russia has also become an important player in that region. In fact, Russia has had a much longer relationship with this region than China. Don't forget the important role that Russia, at that time the Soviet Union, played in the construction of the Aswan Dam in Egypt, one of the major developmental projects in the world, which has served millions and millions of people for decades. And Russia, which has the engineering and financial aspects of that project, they've also had good relations with Syria for a very long while. Hafiz Assad, the father of Bashar Assad, was very close to the Soviet Union. And as we know, in recent times, when the Syrian government was under tremendous pressure, the threat of regime change, all sorts of forces, jihadis, rebels, all of them involved, and you had people in Washington and Britain and Turkey and others backing all these groups. The government of Bashar Assad, it depended upon Russia to help stabilize its position, and the Russians played a big role from 2015 onwards. And so Russia has also been part of that region and has been increasingly important in the politics of West Asia and North Africa. What is significant for us, those of us who are looking at the politics of the region, is that these two big powers, China and Russia, they are different from the United States of America in their dealings with the countries in that region in two different ways. They're different in the sense that they do not seek to hegemonize the region. To give you an example, if you look at this recent accord between Saudi Arabia and Iran, actually, the peace plan was based upon an understanding that two leaders in the region, Saudi leader, the King Abdullah, and Rafsanjani, the leader of Iran at that time, a number of years ago, they had developed an understanding and they had worked out a peace deal. And what China did was to revive that peace deal. They were not imposing their will upon Saudi Arabia and Iran. They revived the deal, and that deal became the basis of that accord that we are now witnessing. So you see, it's a different approach. It is not imposing one's will, but it's allowing the people themselves to decide, and you facilitating the process. This is what the Chinese did. Now, in the case of Russia, quite apart from its involvement in the developmental projects in both Egypt and Syria, we know that when Syria was under threat, the regime, the government was under tremendous pressure. They escalated their military involvement, it's true, sent troops and fighter jets and all the rest of it. But the moment the government was able to stabilize its position, they reduced their troop deployment. They reduced their military involvement, which again shows a certain sensitivity to the integrity, the territorial sovereignty of Syria. And this, I think, is something that we have to keep in mind, that in dealing with other nation states, it is so important to uphold their sovereignty, the sovereignty of the other parties, the other states. And both China and Russia seem to be sensitive to this. And this, I think, is a very important principle in international relations. Recognizing sovereignty, protecting sovereignty, dealing with states, helping them when help is needed, but by recognizing and upholding their sovereignty. And at the same time, if you look at what they have done in the case of China, peace plans, and in the case of Russia, assistance of a different kind, military assistance, but both taking into account the will of the people. And this, I think, is critical. And I hope that if this continues, if they continue to deal with countries in that region that way, both Russia and China, they'd be able to make a major contribution to that region. Don't forget, this region has been the cockpit of conflict in the world for such a long while. And it may bring about a tremendous change, a transformation, where all these countries that are part of that region would be able to concentrate upon economic development, social change. They'd be able to bring about an atmosphere which would be very different from what we have seen for so many decades. And this is what the people need. This is what the people have been waiting for. And that's why I think it's so important that this rapprochement succeeds. And it is so important that these two countries also, China and Russia, they understand the sensitivities of the region and the people and function in such a manner that they would enhance the independence and integrity of the states in the region and their own development. And at the same time, they would contribute towards a new world order and a different international atmosphere. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Chandra. Naturally, I should have mentioned that you are from Malaysia. And I think, you touched upon one of the principles which I think are important to discuss, and that is the question of the respect for the sovereignty of the other country. So thank you very much. Now, the next speaker is a short statement by Charles Freeman, who is a senior diplomat of the United States. He was ambassador to Saudi Arabia. He was the deputy chief of the mission in China. And even more fascinating, he was the one who translated for President Nixon when he went to China in 1972. So he's has an extreme good knowledge of China, of Southwest Asia. And now please let's hear Charles Freeman.
Having exhausted all the alternatives, including covert action directed at regime change, sabotage, proxy warfare, support for U.S. policies of maximum pressure on Iran, and ostracism of both Iran and Qatar, Saudi Arabia finally turned to diplomacy with Iran. The United States could not help it in this effort because, unlike Beijing, Washington is committed to exclusive reliance on coercive approaches to international relations rather than dialogue and mutual accommodation, and of course has no relationship with Tehran. Riyadh began to explore rapprochement, détente, and ways to end the Saudi-Iranian proxy war in Yemen with Tehran in meetings under Iraqi and Omani auspices. These talks yielded some progress, but not enough to close a deal. Some years ago, Beijing put forward principles for conflict resolution and a cooperative security system in the Persian Gulf. It has maintained a balanced relationship with both Riyadh and Tehran. These things made China the only great power capable of mediating between those two capitals. China had long treated the Middle East as an American sphere of influence in which it could play no active political role. But mounting U.S. efforts to oppose China's economic and technological development, or a settlement of the ongoing Chinese civil war between Beijing and Taipei, caused Beijing progressively to set aside its deference to American primacy in the region and eliminated its reluctance to assert its own influence there. In the event, China showed that its newly established global reach and diplomatic capabilities were up to the formidable challenge of supporting a serious peace process in the Middle East. The contrast with decades of American failure to do so in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is really striking. This contrast has raised the global prestige of Chinese diplomacy to the point that China now seems willing to attempt peacemaking in the even more difficult context of the Ukraine war, which of course combines civil war among Ukrainians with war between Kyiv and Moscow, a proxy war between the United States and the Russian Federation, and a contest to find a non-confrontational European security architecture. China's made it clear that it intends to remain engaged in support of concrete arrangements to implement the principles it helped Riyadh and Tehran to agree to. All this marked the effective end of American hegemony in the Middle East and the emergence of Chinese influence as a credible and constructive factor in the region. I think it would be in the interest of the United States, Europe, and other external powers to assist China's enablement of further Saudi-Iranian negotiations that could produce a sustainable peace in the Persian Gulf.
Well, thank you, Chess Freeman. I know he cannot be with us today, but he sent us this message. Now let's turn to another important country, which is sort of part of Southwest Asia. And friends of the Schiller Institute may remember that we discussed already, 1.5 years ago, the project Ibn Sina as a plan to develop Afghanistan, which is in a dire humanitarian crisis. Now, this project has now taken on life because a core group of Afghan exile people living in the diaspora, have adopted that plan, and we will hear now from Mr. Abdul Fattah Raoufi, who is a member of the core team working on the Operation Ibn Sina project. I want to give you the word, Mr. Raoufi.
Dear ladies and gentlemen, first of all, please let me to express my gratitude and appreciation for giving me the opportunity to address this honorable conference. And I'm also honored to be amongst the speakers of this conference discussing on the topic. Without the development of all nations, there can be no lasting peace for the planet. Indeed, there will be no lasting peace without development for all nations. Unfortunately, from the chance to develop enjoyed only certain nations and many others deliberately not given the chance to do so. Let me talk, what does it mean for a nation to which I belong, the Afghan nation. Besides, I'm representing a team of Afghan volunteer professionals in exile working on Project Ibn Sina operation. I will come back to it later in my address. Dear ladies and gentlemen, during the last half century, many countries of the world made significant progress in development of their economies, leading to eradication of hunger, poverty, shortage of clean drinking water, illiteracy, and lack of sufficient healthcare and other challenges of underdevelopment. The best example for this might be People's Republic of China, which achieved many successes in addressing challenges in above-mentioned fields, leading them towards the final goal, to be a fully developed country. As its neighboring country, Afghanistan will definitely benefit from the development achievements of People's Republic of China. In contrary to above-mentioned nations, the Afghan nations have been subjected to two major invasions during the last half-century. Those invasions cancelled all opportunities for Afghan nation to take any step towards economic development, to eradicate hunger, poverty, joblessness, illiteracy, lack of sufficient healthcare, and other challenges of underdevelopment. Besides all invasions the Afghan nation has been subjected to cause not only underdevelopment but a catastrophe in the life of entire Afghan nation, even in the life of those Afghans who supported those invasions and wars. The wars, as a result of those invasions, killed or permanently disabled or wounded millions of Afghans, and some other millions of them were forced to leave their homes and find food and shelter somewhere else, outside their regions or even outside their native country. The last NATO invasion and war waged by almost 50 countries of the civilized war against the poor Afghan nation also caused enormous losses, pain, sorrow, and suffering to the Afghan nation. It is impossible to describe all those sufferings by words. After the departure of NATO from Afghanistan, they left a nation behind devastated by war, hunger, poverty, corruption, organized crime, diseases, and addiction to the drugs. Now, those problems are not the problems of the civilized world, but the problems of a poor nation under the sanctions of the civilized world. After their departure, they put the entire Afghan nation under the sanctions and frozen their assets, leading to further deterioration of the humanitarian situation in Afghanistan. Based on United Nations data, after more than 40 years, Afghan refugees continue to make up one of the largest and most protracted displacement situation under UNHCR's mandate. With a record 28.3 million people, two-thirds of its population in need of humanitarian and protection assistance in 2023. The severe humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan continues deteriorating. The prolonged nature of the crisis has promoted intensified efforts to support Afghan refugees, and the host communities in Iran and Pakistan have generously accommodated them for 4 decades. Ms. Mahbouba Sarraj, a U.S. citizen of Afghan origin who now mainly lives in Kabul and defends the rights of women, in her last interview with BBC Persian, described the current humanitarian situation in Afghanistan as follows. Afghanistan is facing a humanitarian catastrophe, and the world community, under the leadership of the United Nations, has no moral right anymore to sit and to watch without doing anything. They should find an immediate solution for this crisis. Dear ladies and gentlemen, how can any nation develop itself in such harsh and unfair conditions? Nevertheless, while the Afghans inside Afghanistan are struggling to survive, a group of Afghan volunteer professionals in exile has initiated, with support of experts from Schiller Institute, the Project Ibn Sina operation, to draft a proposal plan for future economic development of Afghanistan. The project is given the name Ibn Sina, the founder or father of modern medicine. Known in Western world as Avicenna. He was born in Balkh, a province in the north of Afghanistan. The plan will enable Afghans to rebuild their country independently. Afghans have a large expat community worldwide, and most of them are willing to take part in reconstruction of their homeland. Besides, this project enjoys a strong support from the Afghan government. The other point which I would like to bring to the attention of this honorable conference is that besides sad news concerning humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan, we receive from our families and friends also hope-giving news. The war is finally ended. Peace and security turn to the country after almost 50 decades. Afghan citizens are free to travel to each corner of their country. Corruption, nepotism, plutocracy, hypocrisy, and warlordism have been ended. Looting of government revenues ended. Several minor and major development and reconstruction projects started. The price of food products are kept under strict control. The Afghan currency not only stable, but it has started making slow progress in gaining more value. The Afghan nation really deserves above-mentioned privileges after almost 50 years of suffering from foreign invasions. All these are achieved with limited means and under devastating sanctions, and the mainstream media is absolutely silent about those achievements. To give also Afghanistan the opportunity to eradicate hunger, poverty, and to start developing its economy, I would like to appeal for lifting the sanctions hurting mostly women and children, and for supporting the project of Ibn Sina operation, a new hope towards a developed Afghanistan leading to lasting peace and economic development in the region. If you wish to get more information about this project, please do not hesitate to contact the Schiller Institute. They have also the contact details of our team. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Raoufi. I think your call to lift the sanctions should really be spread everywhere. Now, several of the speakers so far have emphasized the important role of China, especially in the bringing about, diplomatic relations in Southwest Asia. But it is a fact that, the anti-China campaign in the West, in the United States, and also in Europe, increasingly, unfortunately, even in Germany, this is taking on steam, not for any good reason, but for purely geopolitical confrontationist reasons. Now, that may be the reason, or that may be the motivation, geopolitical confrontation of the people who are pushing it. But the problem is that there is an unbelievable lack of knowledge about China. And, that is addressed by our next speaker, who speaks on the topic of the horrible lack of China competency among politicians of the West. Now, this is Professor Kurt Eberspecher, who is a sinologist from the University of Bonn. So please, you have the word.
Ladies and gentlemen, I am very happy to take place in this conference, and I'm even more happy to have something to contribute. I will talk on the amazing lack of China competencies in the West. The topic of China competencies has been, well, very important and also thoroughly discussed for quite some years. It has been a quite a hot topic in Germany for the last 10 years, and I would like to discuss with you what actually has happened and where we are. Just as some food for thought on this way, I just copied from a United States webpage the short picture with the China threat. And just keep this in the back of your mind, and the question, have we already entered an age of the new yellow peril, just very far beyond any China competencies, but basically dominated by Western narratives that portray China in a certain way? China competencies as such has been contemplated and discussed for quite some years. I have given you two examples from the German press from the last years, and there has been a basic consensus in two directions. One is, as you see in the left-hand chart side, where are the China competencies? And on the other side, well, we cannot know everything. So the basic agreement in this is that we need more. One thing is, because of the role of China, if we like it or not, we need to know more. We need China competencies. The second agreement is that there is a lack. There is a lack in the whole education system, on the level of schools, on the level of universities, as well as in bureaucracies, local, federal, and central governments, as well as also in many companies. So the basic consensus at last in Germany since 2015 was, we have to do something, and we have to do something quick. This has been repeatedly uttered in several reports, in several also handouts, memorandums that have been handed to the governments, which appealed, do something, we need to change this. On the other hand, if you look, where are we? For example, if you consider politics, if you have a look, for example, on the German Bundestag, the German Parliament, there was a survey done by the Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung, one of the major German newspapers, and one of the journalists of this newspaper made a survey amongst German parliamentarians who actually speaks Chinese. And the result was that of far over 700 parliamentarians, there were basically 1.5 who actually were able to speak Chinese. The half was one member of the Free Democrats who had actually done some basic courses in Chinese, and the only member of parliament you see here in this picture was Alice Weidel of the AfD, the right-wing alternative for Germany. She's the only one actually proficient in Chinese, and the question is, what does this tell us about the China competencies in the amongst German elites inside the German governments and amongst the German decision makers. Because, as we will see in a minute, the problem is not only if they have China competencies themselves, but if they have to ask China experts, are they actually in a position to evaluate what they are being told, what they read in the newspapers? That's a question that still needs to be answered. So back to the roots of the whole question. What is China competence? China competences can be defined in many ways, and it sometimes depends whom you ask that what answer you get. One possibility is these are the skills necessary to get a realistic and differentiated image of China. Well, wonderful. Or, as the German Ministry for Education and Research tells us, it is the knowledge of language, intercultural competencies, understanding of legal frameworks, as well as about political, economical, cultural, and historical backgrounds. In addition, what is not amongst the modern minds, and I think very thoroughly lacking, was a source from the 1960s, where it also was stressed that it is the ability to see yourself in the eyes of the other. This is, for example, one thing I think actually is thoroughly lacking from our intercourse with China in the present days. It is that we neither want nor probably are able to see ourselves through Chinese eyes. And here's some more food for thought. What are Chinese competencies? You have, on one hand, of course, the China experts. Who actually is a China expert? Are these people who have read a lot about China? Because at the moment you are under the impression that you have an ocean of people who have China expertise and who can basically tell politicians something. The question is, what competences do they have? Or how biased are their views? Are our politicians sometimes trapped in an echo chamber where they basically invite exactly the people who tell them what they want to hear and what already exists in their minds? What are the sources of knowledge? If you don't know Chinese, do you get your Chinese from the knowledge of China from the newspapers? So in this case, you'll have to rely on journalists. Are they competent on China, or are they mainly strong on opinion or basically copy others? What about China experience? Through 3 years through the corona pandemic, basically nobody has been to China, or very few people. So how much real China experience have they? How much China experience when it means having intercourse, having experience with actual living Chinese people? Because you sometimes are under the impression that we're dealing with images rather than living human beings. And finally, what's always lurking in the background is the role of the language. And here we are in a very poor situation. Some other European countries like France or Italy are much more active in actually teaching Chinese to youngsters, while in this case, Germany is quite far behind. And in this case, we sometimes seem to even fall back beyond the positions we already had when it comes to diplomacy. If we look at the recent visits of French President Macron and Ursula von der Leyen representing the European Union to China, we have to ask ourselves, is this only China competencies, or is this basically competence in international relations? For example, in the case of Ursula von der Leyen, if you immediately, before your actual visit, give a public speech where you basically offend your host you are about to see, and then you expect that he will actually negotiate with you. I think that's a basic notion. Just basically need some common sense and not even China competencies. To sum it up, I am basically under the opinion that our political leaders, and probably even the experts who tell them about, would need more China competences to actually understand how much about China we need to know. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Eberspescher. I think that argument is well taken, and I can only fully endorse what you are saying about the utter lack of knowledge about China in political circles in Germany. So we should really think of how to remedy that, because, I mean, you cannot understand the world if you don't see what role China is playing. And now we will hear about the same topic from another extremely qualified person, that is Graham Fuller, who is the former US diplomat and former vice chairman of the CIA's National Intelligence Council. Actually, he was a diplomat or CIA chief in one country in the region at one point, and he will speak about China supersedes US weaponization of diplomacy with development. Please, Dr. Fuller.
I think many people who have been watching watching American policy towards the Middle East for some years have despaired that we have not gotten it right. I mean, we've had unsuccessful wars in Afghanistan and supporting unsuccessful and very bloody wars in Yemen, and not to mention elsewhere in the world. So I think this has often been driven by an American ideological approach, or at least nominal ideological approach, in which we say that we are fighting on the side of democracy and human rights against all those states that seemingly do not honor those values. In fact, I'm afraid, although I'm a great believer, I'm sure you are, and I'm sure most people and most leaders, in fact, in principle, would favor democracy and human rights in some way. The United States has weaponized these concepts to use against states that we do not like, such as Russia, such as China, such as Iran, such as Cuba, and the list goes on of states we won't talk to. But we rarely offer democracy and human rights as a gift to our friends and allies. We give them a pass, like Saudi Arabia or other states, which has no semblance of democracy whatsoever. So the very hypocritical approach of U.S. policy, I think, has weakened it, and furthermore put it on an ideological plane that China has been able to overcome, and saying, look, we have no ideology. Ironically, here's a former or even technically communist state, but claiming that they have no ideological goals in the world except to develop a more stable world and economic benefits for all, which benefits China as well. That has been a successful formula so far for China, and I think will be more so with time. But meanwhile, we're stuck with a kind of quasi-military approach to eschewing diplomacy in favor of tougher, hardline type military and economic sanctions. The United States has been propelled in many ways, I think, towards the military instrument simply because we have overwhelmingly the biggest military in the world. I think our military budget is greater than the next 8 countries combined in the world. So when you have that big a military, as Madeleine Albright once asked, why can't we use it? I guess when it comes to real danger, we can, and I guess might have to use it. But most of the time, one would prefer to put it in your back pocket and rather work through diplomacy. But we've allowed our diplomacy to wither away as an instrument of American policy, and that is where we left a major opening to China, which has constantly talked and used diplomacy to this end. It's been very hard for the United States, I think, to face the fact that even though it's the world's sole superpower, and that is correct in purely military terms, but no longer in economic terms or other frameworks. It's been very hard for the U.S., I think, to give up this pride of occupying that position in the world, that other country, that we can call the shots around the world, that nobody else can really block us in that regard. It's going to be a painful sense of decline, if you will, to gradually give that up. But I don't think it's so much only a matter of whether we, the United States, decides to give it up, as to reality shifting around the world. China is now the world's biggest industrial power. That's something very new for the United States to have to face. Other countries are developing economically. We all know about the so-called BRICS states in the global south, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. Other states want to join this new organization. Turkey wants to, Saudi Arabia wants to, Iran wants to. They're lined up for this. This really removes a great deal of economic power out of the hands of Washington, that especially affects our ability to sanction other countries. Those sanctions increasingly will be less effective, putting war aside. So I think this reality is going to ultimately force Washington to recognize that, my God, this is not the same world as we once thought we occupied, and we're going to have to reluctantly concede our authority in many, many places and turn to more skillful use of diplomacy rather than just military or sanction policies. It will come, but it's going to be very painful. We're kind of like an aged boxer wanting to climb back into the ring to show that we're still number one, but it's getting harder and harder to do.
Well, thank you, Graham. I think the alternative to climbing back in the ring would be that the United States reminds itself of its own better past, like the policies of John Quincy Adams, for example, who said that it was not the job of the United States to go and look for foreign monsters, but to actually form an alliance of perfectly sovereign nation states and, develop them. I mean, the United States could do exactly the same thing what China is doing in having economic cooperation as the basis of the diplomacy. So we have a last speaker in this panel who is addressing, the subject. Actually, the other people were too, but more directly the question of what should be the principles on which the new security and development architecture should be built. And I'm very happy to introduce to you Shakil Ahmad Rameh from Pakistan. He's the CEO of the Asian Institute of Eco-Civilization Research and Development. And he will speak on the question of a contribution to the discussion of principles. Shakil, please go ahead.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. I would like to start by thanking Schiller Institute, especially Madam Helga LaRouche, for inviting me for this important event. I think Madam LaRouche has already put forward many principles, which is famous 10 principles, which she has ably described what this world needs and how the new system should be built. But I would like to add here one more principle, the principle of harmony. The principle of harmony means we need to create harmony between human to human, and we need to create harmony between human and the nature. These are the two things which are required at this point of the time. And this harmony principle should be followed by or supported by two fundamental actions. When we talk about, first let's start by the economy, and this is important because it will go for the human to human harmony. It will support the human to human harmony. We, first of all, on this front, we have to de-securitize economy. What is happening right now across the world, we have securitized economy, and when we are securitizing economy, it means we are creating justification for the military and the security agencies to interfere, and military and the security agencies, they are interfering now. So the human development agenda has on the back burner, and the security drive has taken the driving seat. So that's why I say we must de-securitize. And second thing, why I'm saying de-securitize, because this is the notion or the policy which has been put forward by the military industrial complex. When they have securitized the economy, they have created justification to interfere, and this is, and we can see what is happening across the world. If we have read the book Economic Hitman, it explicitly describes how they work, and as a result, what we are facing today, we are facing not economic competition, economic conflict. We are facing, when the countries are talking about, oh, my economic security is prime, that means they are talking something other. They are talking about only security, not economy. But they are using this economic security notion to attack other countries, to control them. First, after the World War II, they erected financial institutions to colonize countries. We have seen how the Western institutions, they have trapped the world in the debt trap. Many developing countries and the poor countries, they are facing the harsh conditions due to this debt trap. We have seen in Africa, in Asia, in the Latin America. So on the one side, they are employing the financial instrument, but when they are not able to get the desired result, especially in the resource-rich countries, they go for the military solution. Why? They already have described the economy in the term of the security. When they are describing the economy in the term of security, they can take any action, and they have made their people scared of this. If our economy, is not, we are not capturing those resources, that means your lifestyle will be gone. So that's they created a euphoria where they're trying to implement economic security notion to capture the resources of the poor countries, and they're doing. Look around Syria, what is happening there, and look around Libya, what happened there, Iraq. You can give so many examples. You can give the example of Afghanistan, a number of examples you can give from across the world. That's why I say, so to create harmony between human to human, we need to de-securitize economy. It will help countries to work on the development of the people, to use the economic growth for the development of the people. It will help to address the challenges of the poverty, health, education, a number of other things. And second action, I think we need to balance the ambitions to combat the climate change and the living needs of the people. Why I'm saying? Because on the one side, if we see, so some countries, they are striving to get just access to the electricity. For example, if you look at the African countries, what is their per capita consumption of electricity? If you talk about Niger, Chad, and a number of other countries, maybe some countries, they have a double-digit per capita consumption. But on the other side, if you look at that, the per capita consumption of electricity in Iceland, more than 50,000 per capita. If you look around in the USA, 12,000, more than 12,000, Norway more than 20,000. So their per capita consumption is far ahead than the poor countries. And the poor country need more electricity and energy to realize their dream of a development. For that purpose, they need some space. And here comes the balancing of the policy. Why I'm saying? Balancing means on one side where they're using the per capita consumption to sustain their lifestyle. For example, in Norway, in USA, in Germany and other countries, they have to cut down their per capita consumption to bring it under the control, where the only what is needed, that should be met, and from the clean sources. And second, when the developing countries they're talking about, the poor countries they're talking about, they need some space. They should be encouraged to invest in the hydroelectricity. They should be encouraged to invest in the nuclear energy, and they should be supported for those activities because there is a direly needed. That's why President Xi Jinping once said on the context of the climate change, he mentioned that there's a need to create a balance between ambitions of the carbon emissions and the living needs of the people. Why it is? Because he believes. So when you want to take any action, you need support of the society. If you are not taking care of the living needs of the people, you cannot get the support of the society. If you are not getting the support of the society, you cannot make any policy successful. That's why I say, so there's a need to create a balance. I think if we want to move towards a new security system and development, maybe this principle of the harmony and this principle and supported by two actions, desecuritization of economy and balancing the climate actions, will help us to achieve. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Shakil. So now can we please have all the panelists come up? I think we are down to 3 is now, but I think somebody else wanted to come on. It's a little bit difficult because it's late and we are over many time zones, so some of the people apologize that they can't make it. But maybe we should start to hear if the panelists who are on right now have any reflections on what they heard so far. Jacques, you want to start? You are muted.
I found what our Pakistani friend said extremely important. From the standpoint of what before called Bescher, our German friend said, we have to confront not only the German Bundestag, but in the whole West, the inability to see ourselves in the eyes of the other. So a thinker of the 16th century, Jean Bodin, in French, who was more European than French, in the 6 books of the Republic, says that the principle of harmony is the same in music as in statecraft. So he says it's to organize the harmony of dissonances. Harmony of dissonances because we are all different, but there is a unity of humanity. And it's the differences that enrich, the difference of approaches that enrich this capacity for humanity to improve the world, to improve society. And this is exactly the question of the advantage of the other. Because if you think in terms of that you believe that the other has a potential for goodness, then you have a trust in the other. And together you can build something which is better. And it creates a mutual trust. And with this mutual trust, your creative powers are mobilized and you change things. That's exactly the way the Chinese thought in terms of creating a community of approach between Saudi Arabia and Iran recently. And it's a way that the Silk Road and the one and the general concept of the Silk Road, based on a win-win principle, connectivity and inclusivity, works. And this is lacking in the West because we have not reached that level, or we have lost what we had in our approach to that level for our own principles. So this is absolutely key to revive in our minds this principle, as you did, Helga, with those 10 principles that you presented to humanity for reflection, thinking, and advancement.
You're muted.
Hello, do you have any, Shakil, do you have any comments? I don't know why I'm not being heard right now. Shakil, you're muted. Shakil, we can't hear you. Okay. Okay, so what we should do is, I have a whole bunch of questions and I will start to read some of them, and then maybe you can fix your technology there. There are actually two questions coming from Bolivia. One is saying, this is from Pablo Daza from La Paz in Bolivia, saying, how can third world countries leave aside their economic dependence and aim at economic development if there are debt with international organizations that exert constant pressure and demonize any attempt at industrial development? Now, who wants to address that? Well, I can. If you don't want to do it, I can basically say. I mean, look, we are right now in a situation where the Western financial system is going to have other major developments after the collapse of the new Silicon Valley Bank and then the Credit Suisse and the takeover by UBS. There was a certain panic and people thought, we are back in 2008. Then, as it always goes, money pumping occurred and then the exuberance in the markets took over again. But that will be very short-lived because we have reached really the end of the road in terms of the ability of pumping money and then going to quantitative tightening, quantitative easing. All I'm saying is we are heading towards a situation where the need to put a reorganization on the table for earnest will force itself on the agenda. And, either it will be done in an orderly way, which is what we are trying to, push. If you look at the 10 principles, one of them is the 4 laws of LaRouche, or it's within those principles, which is, among other things, the idea of global banking separation, Glass-Steagall, the creation of national banks, the establishment of a new credit system. And in that context, most of the debt, especially the so-called illegitimate debt of the developing countries, which has been due to unfair conditionalities, may have to be written off. I mean, there is some debt which just cannot be repaid. So I think that, with the alternative coming into being, and the new development bank is a very important step in that direction, I think that we have to convince, even if it looks very unlikely right now, the United States and Europe that they have to cooperate, because otherwise it will end up in chaos and in a catastrophe. But Jacques and Shakil, if you may have some more comments, please go ahead.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, now I can hear you.
Okay, so can you once repeat the question, because I just heard a little bit because I was just thinking about fixing my voice. So can you repeat the question again?
Yeah, the question came from Bolivia. How can third world countries leave aside their economic dependence and aim at economic development if they are debt with the international organizations that exert constant pressure and demonize any attempt at this industrial development?
Okay, I think you have explained wonderfully. There is nothing which I can add to this question. Sorry, I took your time.
Then also from Bolivia comes this is from, wait a second, from a question from David. This is here. How do you eliminate corruption? The United Nations must be dissolved and reimagined, in my opinion. What do you think? Jacques, you want to give it a try?
Yes, there should be a thinking about the future of United Nations, because the conditions after the war were that the 5 countries, France, the United States, Great Britain, China, and Russia, who are won against the Nazis, were together in the Security Council, whereas at the same time you have the General Assembly of the United Nations. I think we have reached a point of history where things have to be changed. As a first step, if I was in a French position of power, I would say that France should represent the non-aligned countries and endorse the non-aligned countries. And I am trying to do everything to reach that level. Otherwise, the composition itself of the United Nations and the World Security Council has to be changed. It has to be a process because it cannot be done that way. It has to be a process with the development of the BRICS and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. These organizations, who are generally committed to physical economy, should create the conditions where the United Nations would change in their composition to be really coherent with the initial principles that, for example, Franklin Delano Roosevelt had, and go back to that. So this thinking is part of what we are doing with the Schiller Institute, our thinking in the future, and it will be a process linked to the new world economic order. And the two things would work together and become one, and I'm very confident it will happen, the only alternative being war and chaos. So we have to work and put more work and thinking on it according to our principles.
Okay, another question is, in Bolivia, we have one of the lowest incomes in the region. What guidelines should we follow to improve this? Should we think about a new democracy, bearing in mind that Plato did not believe in democracy as a form of government? This is from Sandra Marca from Bolivia.
Can I add on that?
Yes, please.
Okay. I think the new form of the democracy, I believe there is only one form of the democracy which care for the people and which care for the good governance and which care for the welfare of the people. If any model, it does not need to be a specific model from anywhere in the world. It can be any model specific to any country, indigenous model. If the model is taking care of the needs of the people, welfare of the people and the governance, whether there is no corruption, there is especially on the intellectual level. So that's mean we should adopt that. It happened everywhere in the world, we can see. So when the Western countries, as from the liberal order, when the system was designed for the welfare of the people, it worked. But at the time when the system stopped to take care of the people, welfare of the people, we are facing this problem right now. So it started to disappear. So we need to be conscious. It can be any model of the democracy. But if that model is serving the interest of the people, that is the best. So we should not be thinking about any specific model like this Western model, this Chinese model, this Islamic model, or this model or that model. Only one criteria, if it is serving the interest of the people. Thank you.
Thank you. There are many more questions, but since Shakil, you addressed the principles and suggested that another principle should be added, I want to respond to it. You mentioned the principle of harmony and balance. In a certain sense, absolutely, but I thought that this was covered already in the principle where I said that the political, economic, and social life should be brought into cohesion with the actual laws of the physical universe. Because my view of the physical universe is that universe is in a harmonic relation. I mean, it goes back to Kepler, who developed that the position of the planets was in a harmonic placement, very similar to the musical compositions. And Leibniz talked about the pre-established harmony which exists in the universe. And Nicolaus, of course, even earlier than that, had the idea that there is a cohesion between the laws of the microcosm and the macrocosm, the microcosm being the human mind and the macrocosm being the physical universe. Because otherwise, the fact that any creative idea made by a human mind does have an effect in the physical universe. For example, when you have a discovery of a new scientific principle, you apply that in the production as a technology, then that leads to an improved productivity of the production, an increase of the living standard, an increase of the longevity of the people. So that is the proof that there is a correspondence between something which comes from the microcosm, an idea which has no physical content whatsoever. It's you can't weigh it, you can't measure it, but still it has an effect in the physical universe, and therefore the laws of the microcosm and the macrocosm have an affinity. And Nicolaus also was of the opinion that the harmony of the macrocosm can only be accomplished by the maximum development of the microcosms, and that each microcosm takes it as its own self-interest to develop the other microcosm and vice versa. So that, in a certain sense, is an established idea of a harmonic system in the actual physical universe. And, I'm sorry that I didn't make it explicit, but for me, that was so self-evident that I sort of took it implicitly, but I'm perfectly happy to rethink it. And actually that brings me to the idea that I think we probably should have an entire conference inviting thinkers from different countries and areas to discuss, how these principles can actually be, fine-tuned, because I think that discussion about the principles is the absolute precondition for this new paradigm to function. And I think this came out very clearly in the discussion yesterday and today. Jacques?
Yes, just one thing on the case of Bolivia. I think that this connection between the microcosm and macrocosm is exemplified with the case of Evo Morales, who was a cocalero, and moved by his care for the people, he understood the need for nuclear energy. So this makes me think in the terms of what Dennis Small stressed. Beyond unipolarity and multipolarity, you have this care for the people and the creative principles that you developed. And for Bolivia, which is a small country, it could become, with the other countries of Iberoamerica, of South America in particular, an example for the rest of the world. Every country can become this example, provided its spirit of sovereignty is developed as trust for the sovereignty of the other.
Then we have, you want to answer? Go ahead.
No, I don't want to answer, madam. I just want to show my consensus with your thought, the harmony. You have already discussed, but just I made this more explicitly. I put in the word. But I would like to say, in the harmony between nature and the human and human to human, when I was talking about it in my video message also, the demilitarization, desecuritization of this economic system, that is fundamental for me, because it is the real problem. When they feel like that, so then the people are talking about the economic development, they came up with the idea of economic security. They securitize the economy. And that is a fundamental difference which I see when the financial system and the financial imperialism started to take control and the production system started to disappear. So that more explicitly I want to talk. If you want to have organize something about that, then we can discuss more in the future. Thank you, ma'am.
Well, actually, we have already a question which addresses a similar topic, and that is from Nicholas Byrne, who says, arguably, if the United States was run in a truly democratic and ethical manner, it would not have the money to be the biggest military in the world. What is the military used for? Not for the benefit of the US citizens. What could be done with the military instead? Reconstructive strategy is my specialization, and when money makes the world go around, and when the US, then alternatives will be needed. So what is your take on that, Jacques? Both of you.
I think what happened on March 19 is an answer this rage against the war machine, that you see people concerned, and it's at this point a few organizations, 200, but if not very numerous, with people, not so many people, but the concerned people, and this is concerned people that change history. And we have in the United States this potential to change history because of the history that made the United States themselves. And I think this is a sense of the American exception. The American exception is not the United States being the best and, as it was said before, calling the shots around the world. Is United States as an example. And in that sense, the history of the United States should be cleaned from what was wrong in the United States and develop what was a gift to the world from the American Constitution and the American principle of independence. And I think it's very important to think back that the Schiller Institute, when you created it, Helga, took the Declaration of Independence of the United States as an example to inspire the Schiller Institute in its spirit. So I think that's, in a way, an answer to the challenge of the question of the United States.
Well, we have actually already in, I think it was 2014, this is when the BRICS became more prominent and the new Silk Road was put on the agenda by President Xi Jinping. We actually wrote also a development plan for the United States because, the infrastructure of the United States is in a terrible condition because of the outsourcing. The United States has put out a lot of its small and medium industry into cheap labor markets. So, you really would need a reindustrialization program. So what we did is we made a infrastructure plan for the United States, which would basically be a fast train system. China has 40,000 kilometers fast train, and now they're 350 kilometers per hour. And now they are experimenting with a 600 kilometer per hour maglev train. So the United States could also set up a fast train system connecting the east and the west coast, the north and the south, all the industrial centers. There are vast regions which need to be completely, really revamped, like New York, New Jersey. If you go through the streets in New Jersey, you never go with a Fiat 500 over those streets. You will disappear in a pothole for sure. So, then we had even science cities. The Midwest is very thinly populated, and you could set up completely new science cities which could be centers for study, universities and cultural centers. So there could be theoretically the transformation from the military industrial complex into civilian production, reconstructing the United States. Now that obviously will not be welcomed now by the people who want to have 20% return on their investment every year. But the question is, how do you get a future which is durable? And since this high profit speculation is coming to an end one way or another, I think there must be serious people in the United States in all areas, who think, how can you put the United States back on a perspective, where the economy and the people are being benefited. I know this discussion right now is not very far spread, other than what we are saying, but that may change. So that was just my additional comment to this. Go ahead, Jacques.
This was already accomplished after World War II. The World Victory Program and the United States has a very, very high debt at the time after the war. The World Victory Program was transformed into an industrial development. The problem is that the oligarchical forces took over part of that program and little by little went into this military-industrial complex that Eisenhower denounced. But the impulse was there, and the people that participated to that impulse among the American workers kept that of the spirit and transmitted it. So that's American history, but it's also what you have and what could reappear and what's said before in the Generation Z. This Generation Z can be reorganized as a generation who at the same time learn and relearn what's the history of their family in the United States, and that it was connected for the benefit of the world at its best, and how it was distorted. And I think that is a tremendous potential for the United States in that sense, despite the fact of the increase in the military expenses today and the power of Raytheon and other companies, Lockheed, Raytheon and others. It can be transformed if the military, if there is the willful intervention of the people. And I think that what we're doing to call the spirit in the United States, that political will, is the key for the future.
I can add one more thing, ma'am?
Please go ahead.
Okay. I think when we talk about the securitization of economy, they also have taken the Generation Z or the future generations into their clutches, and they are trying to control those new in the future by investing on the technology. Look at why the CIA is creating a technology department to just take care of the competition or to China or something else. Actually, they have officially controlled the new technologies now. They want to control, not that they have a control, because they have the competitors in the world right now. So for the Europe, for the USA, they have officially declared everything is coming in our domain, because it's economic security. When there is a security, the security agencies are there, military is there. So don't worry about that, we will take care. And this is a justification for their budget. And they have successfully changed the slogan of economy from economic development, human development, to the security development operators. And that operators is creating a problem. Are you talking about the infrastructure? If you look at that, I was just reading somewhere figure, about $2 trillion shortfall of investment in US every year for the infrastructure development. It is creating the problem of the services, like food, like education, like health, everything. You have to pay for it. Every poor country, poor man, especially in the US, the cost of the health system or the health, these are services, they're quite high. Why? Because the economic system has been shifted from economic development to economic security. And I think that was Helga Zepp-LaRouche, when I was looking at that, he was focusing on go back to the basics of economy, the production, physical production. Don't fall in the hand of the financial imperialist. But unfortunately, we have been fallen in the hands of the financial imperialists, and they are being supported by this industrial military complex. Thank you.
Okay, I have here two questions pertaining to Africa, and I will put them together. One is from Mvumbi Mavambu Torde. What strategy can you give to African countries or the DR Congo in particular where the use will is to generate more on agriculture, but may not have the government support. And the second question is from Colin Hamill. Saddam and Gaddafi were both killed after going to the OPEC and saying not to accept the US dollar when Gaddafi wanted to supply Africa with water and other infrastructure. Will Africa ever trust the West again? This is a big question, I think. What is your thought on that?
Okay, I can start on this. I think the matter of the trust, the fundamental problem with the trust is that we have a history which is telling us something else. But unfortunately, intellectual corruption is also playing a role here. Intellectually, we are telling them, oh, we have a history of the civilization. We have a civilization built on the rules and the regulations and laws and the norms. I'm not talking about the past. I'm talking about also the present. But when the application of these norms, values come, nobody care about it. They will go to violate. I just give one example. International Monetary Fund, IMF, they have the clause they will not give the money to the countries where a major conflict is active. But they changed that clause to give money to the Ukraine. But on the other hand, Pakistan is facing the problem and they are not releasing the 1 billion. Why Pakistan is not complying their policy? So in this context, we can judge the trust in the present. If we take into consideration the past, what has been happened, how the African countries and they have committed crimes there, not only in Africa, but all other parts of the world. Like I was just reading the figure today, 165 million people have to suffer in a subcontinent due to the British Empire alone. They killed people, they suffocated people, they put people on the hunger. Presently, if you have to look the West, you go to the Australia, look the Aboriginal people, what they are facing there. And most recently, they were not even considered the human, they were given the dog number. In 70s, they started to call them the human, but go still there and find how they are living there. They are the real owner of that land. And I tell you, Aboriginal people, they were doing the trade with China before, 2,000 years ago, 3,000 years ago. But the Europeans killed them and they tell them, you are not a good people, we will teach you the civilization, and they kill them. And now they're telling them, you are not able to do the things. So in this context, if we also look at Africa, what they did to the Africa. Trust, I don't think so. I think we can do. If I talk about from subcontinent, what we have faced, 45 trillion economy was looted from here. British took $45 trillion from the subcontinent. Alone from the subcontinent, these are rough estimates. It does not include other social conditions also. So I don't think so. No, anybody can trust these industrial military complexes are their means. And that's why they are hell-bent now again, because they knew that they looted their sources, they plundered their sources, they controlled the world, and they enjoyed the dividend of that plunder. They built their modern cities. But now they're fighting themselves. No, they cannot plunder anymore from other part of the world. So they drafted the financial system, where they're again trying to colonize the world. In this context, African countries, Asian countries, and other parts of the world, we cannot trust. That's why we need an alternative system which take care of needs of everybody as a human, not as some countries declare themselves the first-class country, some third-class country, some second-class country. Their needs are different like that. No, we need a system where everybody been treated like an equal human. That's what I think the key message of this conference also. So, and again, when we look around, I will conclude my comments with that. On the climate actions, they're asking the developing country, do this, do this, do this, do this, but they're not thinking about their needs of energy. What level of energy is needed there? you will find many countries in Africa where the per capita consumption of energy is 20 kilowatt per hour, or 100 kilowatt hour, or 200, 300. And you are telling them to don't go for energy. It is against the climate change. That is a big debate. I don't want to waste time here. But I'm telling simply, you're sitting in USA, you are having more than 12,000 per capita consumption of energy. You are telling a country in Africa which have less than 50 kilowatt per capita consumption, you're telling them the norms and the values. Sorry, you have to think about it. You have to go back to the basics, a system which is equally beneficial for everybody. Thank you.
Okay, I have here another very interesting question, which I guess Jacques will say something about it. This is from Johnny, and he says, what about AI and robots replacing workers? Do you believe this is good for productivity and economic growth? How does this fit into the new system we are talking about?
Well, as Lyndon LaRouche always said, it depends on the intention. If you have the intention to create conditions to train humans in being non-humans, as it is done today, it will be an absolute evil. If it's controlled by people that care for the people, if it's controlled by the BRICS, the One Belt, One Road principles, if it's controlled by the Schiller Institute principles that you, Helga, raised for reflection, if there is that intention, then the artificial intelligence would destroy the jobs that are non-creative. It will destroy many jobs as traders, as speculators. It will destroy jobs in many areas of white shirt jobs, and it will create a situation where we have to create new type of human labor, of human jobs. And this is a big challenge of the period to come, connected to the big challenge of changing the architecture of the world, to create a world proper to the epochal change that is so absolutely necessary, and to avoid war and economic chaos. So this means that to create jobs that are really creative, are really human labor, and these jobs, these works would not be things that are mainly defined by wages, that you make an effort and you get money for it. No, it will be to create things that are socially useful in terms of the technological progress of humanity. And then the artificial intelligence should be a servant of this policy, as it is a servant, for example, when you have a rover in Mars, as I said before, and it can help for the rover to behave when it cannot be connected with human beings, and it had to develop its own capabilities to face known events. When you enter into the area of the unknown, what you have to discover, new physical principles, then artificial intelligence is absolutely, it's for nothing. It's like I said, it's something that cannot think. It has not a conscience. It's not conscious. So you have to be self-conscious to create new physical principles, and then artificial intelligence gather data, organize the data, checks the data, and you have not compelled to do all this boring job. So you have something that helps you to develop, and it can be very useful to make leaps in the development of the countries of the world who are not yet reached the industrial level, the level of full industrial level. What our Chinese friend said yesterday is very useful. You need the state, you need the experience of the mind of the state to organize an industrial process. But this process has to be organized with caring for the people that are working for improving their conditions. So it means people that he called in proto-industries, then industries, middle industries, and then machine tool principles of higher forms of industry. And that, as a assistant, artificial intelligence can help to organize, provided there is a mind to check all the stages, and who organizes a dynamic process, being a kind of mind in organizing this process, like I would say, the sun is the mind of the solar system. So you need that principle. And this artificial intelligence, forget about it, but it can be a helper and a useful helper, provided that you have the right intention towards what you want to accomplish.
Well,
And
I would like to
one
add
more-
something.
One more.
I just would like to add something to what Jacques said, and then, but you go ahead first.
No, ma'am, you go ahead. I will talk later.
Well, I just think that we are in the beginning of a new revolution which completely changes the economy. If you think, how incredible the change was in the last 10,000 years, from practically Stone Age conditions to, now you have smartphones, you can have, conferences with people all over the world. You have an unbelievable progress. Now we are in front of, space science being applied in all fields, also medical, agriculture. In any case, all I'm saying is I think we are on the verge of a completely new industrial phase. It will not be the type of industry as it was. It will be much more basically that the human mind will develop ideas, and then even machine tools will be made by machine tools. And, the time, there will be an enormous, more time available, because all the physical work, all the non-productive work will be taken over by robots and by mechanizations of various types. But then that brings up another question, and that is, and I had this discussion with the rocket pioneer Kraft Erika, because he developed this whole idea of a village on the moon and Mars travel and interstellar travel. So, he at one point said that what the Schiller Institute is doing is so extremely important, because technological and scientific progress cannot be stopped. Naturally, if we blow ourselves up in World War III, it can be stopped. But let's say we can avoid World War III and the evolution and development of mankind will continue. You will have breakthroughs which are not even thinkable. You can't even ask the questions yet, because, as we break through in new areas, completely new domains will be opened. And then the question is, this is what Kraft Erika told me, the question of, the aesthetic education of man is going to be the crucial difference, because, if people will have a lot of free time. Now, will they use that free time for video games and, other useless activities? Will they, be, manipulated in, their brain being, their function of the brain being altered by video games, among other things, by drugs? It's a catastrophe that Germany is going in the direction of drug legalization. After everything what happened in Holland and what's happening in the United States, I can only say the people who are doing this are completely evil. That's just in parentheses. Now, we will have a lot more free time in the future as a human species. And then the question is, can we organize that time in such a way, that we really use it for creative development for our whole life? That means we have to rethink the way, how we organize our life. And I think that will bring up a whole bunch of new very fascinating questions, because I think the human potential has only been tapped. Who has the time to develop all what you want to do? Do you have the time to become a concert pianist, a top opera singer, a top inventor, a top sports person, a top, all of these things potentially one could do, but we have no time. Would you like to write poems? Would you like to do painting? Would you like to construct new machines? We don't have the time to do all of these things. So if we are freed by artificial intelligence, by robots, by all of these developments which take away the burden of labor and set free that part, that we can really develop our personality for the common good of society, I can foresee that the future generations will be so much more creative than what we are even dreaming of. And I think we are the creative species. And I think, it really is a joyful idea. And, you can see that in societies where the people have the feeling that the government is taking care of the common good, they're not afraid of AI. In governments and countries where they are afraid that they're being surveyed by Big Brother, people are extremely paranoid and they think they're being listened to in everything they do. So you can actually see the difference. But I think the aesthetic education, the idea of making people, of giving them the chance to improve their emotions, to become more beautiful souls, to become more loving, to train your emotions to be on the level of reason, which is what the aesthetic education is all about. That will become much, much more important. So I'm not afraid of this, but we have to really discuss it in the right way.
Okay, Joe, I just want to put it here. I think 2 or 3 years back, I have written a paper on new things about the security. The fundamental thing which artificial intelligence has brought to us is that in the past, whenever there was technological breakthrough, it was always subservient to the human. It helped to increase the efficiency of a human. That's why we needed the new skill set to benefit from those efficiencies and for those opportunities. But artificial intelligence is the first time the human are facing some competitor in the thinking process, because the thinking process, we always say it's a domain of the human. But artificial intelligence, that has challenged and come as a competitor to the human. And that is a fundamental thing. I think we need to deliberate more on that. Either we have to put it in a competitor, or we have to bring it like past any technology we have adopted subservient to the human interest and the human. So that will be a fundamental thing in coming days. We have to see the reports or something else. For example, we celebrate that these cars, self-drive cars, no need of the drivers, nothing like that, artificial intelligence driven. But I was reading a book and there was a new type of the crimes in the future. I think it was written by some American author. If any car is going along the road and the system has been hacked, so it would be a new type of, you can say, the killing, a new type of the killers, the hitmans. You don't need to be present here, there as a human, only you have to hack the system. So rest of the things will be done accordingly. So there are 2 or 3 things, more things we can talk about the security, but fundamentally for me is how to balance the notion of competitor. Either artificial intelligence should be applied as a competitor to the human, or it should be applied as a subservient to the human. That will be the fundamental thing. And lastly, madam, what you are talking about, the beautiful souls, poetry and everything, Pakistan, and I will give you example from Pakistani context. Our national poet, Allama Muhammad Iqbal, he was a great philosopher. He spent a long time in Germany with Goethe and other people. He said a very beautiful verse. He said about the machines. He said one day it will kill the souls and the emotions of the people. So we don't let the machines to rule us. Unfortunately, maybe that is happening now, the rule of the machines. Maybe we have to look around how the artificial intelligence can be bring back, but that will be a fundamental question, how we will discuss and how we devise the rules and regulations to bring artificial intelligence as a subservient to the human, not as a competitor. Thank you.
Well, that's a very fascinating discussion, but I think we need to go into the depths some other time a little bit more, because I do not think that artificial intelligence will ever be a competitor to the human mind. It may be that artificial intelligence can do certain things a zillion times more efficient, but it will not fundamentally be creative. That is the big difference, And anyway, this is a very deep discussion, which we actually have since 50 years in this organization. But I see that we have now also Mr. Raufi here. So I welcome you in the discussion. And I actually have a question here which pertains to Afghanistan, and is from Elizabeth, who asks, please tell us what is the best thing a Westerner could do to help Afghanistan? And what is the top priority for Pakistan? That's obviously for you, Shakil.
Okay. I think the best thing the world can do for Afghanistan is let them decide their future. Because they have seen the interferences from the USSR, they have seen the interference from the USA, they have seen the interference from the NATO. The end result is there's a destruction. So we have to come to know that Afghan people will not accept any power as their ruler or their dictators. They are very, you can say, they love to rule themselves. If the biggest thing would be, let them decide their future and come as a cooperate with them to bring education there, food there, employment, economic opportunity, livelihood opportunities. That will help Afghanistan. If you're telling them only just every time, oh, you have to do this, you are not following this, you are not following this, fundamentally killing the argument of diversity. As we believe every country have the right to adopt any system of democracy or the governance, they also have the right to decide about their future. And we have to stop somehow the propaganda about Afghanistan. For example, about the education. We also have to talk to them why they are doing these things. Either they lack resources, they lack universities, they lack teachers. Why are they facing the problem in the education sector? Do anybody do the research on that? How much population need food there? What is the humanitarian crisis is going on there? And when they are going through the battle of the life and the death, you are telling them to observe the norms and values. They are surviving. They are trying to survive through this humanitarian crisis, which has been created by freezing all their resources abroad by USA and their allies. And no country is helping them. And when you are not helping them, how will you be in a position to tell them what to do and what not to do? How you can teach them what is the benefit of the cooperation when they're saying there is no cooperation? When they're seeing there is no cooperation and nobody is helping them, they are just lecturing them. Do this, a long list of to do. But on the ground, little. Here is come also Pakistan. If you look around as a Pakistani, we again believe that we need to respect their independent choices, their sovereignty. And we need to work with them, not ask them to work with us, because they are the owner of their country. Like every sovereign nation, they have the right, like what we are seeing. So every sovereign nation, they have the right to decide for them. Why we are not applying this same principle there? For the last more than 40 years, they are fighting the external forces, one way and other way. And how they can trust the external forces will not fight with them again? That is a fundamental question. 40 years is a long period. new generation born, the kids born in the battlefields. They have seen the battlefields. So we have to keep our cool. They are good people also. They listen to us when you talk sense with them and you talk to them as a cooperative hands, not as a, you can say, when you present yourself, oh, we are here, you teach you something. So that is a problematic. We need to find ways to cooperate. Through the cooperation, we can bring the desired changes, not by dictating or telling them or handing over a to-do list. I think that is what China is doing right now. They are offering their economic opportunities. They are offering, for example, if you look at the position paper of China, one sentence which I like the most is to convert Afghanistan from landlocked to land-linked country. Because if you have to connect different corridors, for example, China-Pakistan economic corridor, if we want to link that corridor with other corridor of the BRI, China, Central Asia, and West Asia corridor, it goes through the Afghanistan. And if from this side of the world, if we want to go to Eurasia, it will go through the Afghanistan. So exactly Afghanistan become a land-linked country. But for that purpose, we have to work with them. And I hope world will realize it soon and start to work. China and Pakistan are already on the same page on this thing. Pakistan is doing the trade with them, and the China is trying to help them in infrastructure. And if you have seen the news yesterday, they were negotiating about some mines on lithium. They were talking about a $10 billion investment in the lithium in Afghanistan to start with, because the lithium deposits are more than $1 trillion in Afghanistan. If that one sector is explored, it will help Afghanistan, and China is doing that. Thank you.
Mr. Raoufi, you want to say something what Westerners can do to help Afghanistan?
Yes, thank you. I think the most points were already explained by Mr. Shakil. Problems that Afghanistan is faced now. The Western world really should stop dictating Afghanistan to do what they think is nice and what they think it is good for Afghanistan. What we desire not only from the Western countries or the Western countries, also from neighboring countries, to stop invasions interfering in the affairs of Afghanistan. We really tired from invasions. The last 50 years, Afghanistan was subjected 2 times to major foreign invasions. As I explained also in my address or speech, Afghanistan is now or is already faced with a lot of problems. Afghanistan is devastated during the last 20 years, and even before that, because the NATO invasion came after invasion of Soviet Union. The country was not healed, not reconstructed. Even people didn't come back from refugee camps from Pakistan, from Iran, and like me, people in exile, they didn't return, and there started another invasion, a very huge invasion, a very devastating invasion. Probably nobody knows in the history of humanity what has happened in Afghanistan, because mass media or mainstream media, they never shown what has happened in Afghanistan. Afghanistan is now faced with a lot of humanitarian problems. You just talked before this about aesthetic education, that all people should follow aesthetic education and develop themselves. But you have to understand that a lot of people are today facing with hunger. When you are hungry and you have nothing to eat, and we are struggling to find shelter from bombings, from foreign invasions, you have no time to develop yourself, to think about the future. You are only struggling to survive. only to struggling survive. What should now the Western world, it is really their moral obligation because they destroyed this country 20 years. They should lift the sanctions. The sanctions, what they imposed on Afghanistan, those sanctions are not really targeting the politicians of Afghanistan, for example. They are directly, those sanctions, targeting women, children, elderly, and people, they become disabled in this war. A lot of children, they were disabled. For example, one example I can tell you, a boy, he was sitting in their house in one of the provinces of Afghanistan, and a drone came and bombed their house. That guy is now 25 years old. It is a burden on the society. The whole family now have to take care about this guy. He is disabled, totally disabled. It is one example of millions of Afghans. Afghanistan is really tired from invasions. Really, we beg, we ask all nations, stop invading Afghanistan. Now we are afraid and very, very worried about next invasion. From which side will it come? We are appeal now not to the Western world, to the whole humankind. Stop invading Afghanistan. Please leave this country to heal from the wounds of 2 last invasions, to reconstruct and leave the children to go to school. To go to school. Now, every day they are talking about the rights of girls, about the right of women, they are not going to work. If we take Pakistan, for example, in Pakistan, all ladies, young girls, they go to schools, from primary school, from all school kind of schools, university. But please look to the situation in Pakistan. What is happening to that country? The country is in turmoil, in financial turmoil. No lady, no girls can help this country to recover. So the biggest problem, in my view, is foreign invasion. Also, Pakistan is targeted, not allowed to develop itself as a completely independent country. They are also, I think they are also not, they are not enjoying a complete sovereignty, but unfortunately, always they are faced with some problems. But the problems of Afghanistan, I do not want to talk about Pakistan. I would like to use this time and opportunity to talk about the problems of Afghanistan. Afghanistan has huge problems. Even, it is very difficult to describe by words. It is very difficult to describe by words. As I said, I watched an interview from a lady. She is Afghan from origin, but she lived in the United States, but now she's living in Kabul. She was interviewed by BBC, and she said, what is now happening in Afghanistan, that is a humanitarian catastrophe. In United Nations, in all so-called civilized world, they are watching that we are suffering, and we are suffering. What has happened in Afghanistan now under the sanctions, and they are not able even buy, for example, medications. And when they buy medications somewhere, they have to pay for that. But all bank accounts are frozen. You are not allowed, you are not able to go to buy something. For example, for reconstruction, we need machinery in Afghanistan. Also the same case. You are not able to even buy a heavy truck to bring it to Afghanistan. I'm working as an engineer in a company in the Netherlands. Our company is not allowed to sell trucks to Afghanistan because Afghanistan is under the sanctions. That is very bizarre. And unfortunately, yeah, when we talk about civilized world, what they did with Afghanistan? Can they think what has happened there? They used all kind of weaponry, what you can imagine. Even dirty bombs they used there. Now children, there are children born totally disabled. And now we talk, yeah, I'm really very disappointed, not me, but the whole Afghan nation. What you are doing with us, first you invade Afghanistan 20 years without any reason. There was fabricated reasons to attack Afghanistan. Afghanistan is really not interfering in the affairs on any country, not neighboring countries and not outside the region. Because Afghanistan has no financial, no military potential to do so. And even Afghanistan has no intention, never an Afghan think to invade, for example, our neighboring country, Pakistan or Iran or other countries. That is not in our culture. But unfortunately, we are targeted to two huge invasions from Europe. The last one is a devastating one. Afghanistan is now, luckily the war is what has happened after departure of NATO. War is ended completely. In the rule of law, I have to say, people are not suffering from banditism, from all kind of corruption or other unrest in the society. But the big challenge is to eliminate hunger, poverty in Afghanistan. And that is now with the current government, with very limited means, they are trying to solve this problem. We Afghans in exile, all from our salaries, we try to help them, but it is very, very little what we can do. For example, how much can I send from my salary to my family? Because look to the prices, what is happening now in Europe. Really, we also will be not able to give any financial support to our families. It will also end very soon. In the coming months, it will end because we will not have this opportunity. So that is what is now happening. When the question was asked what to do for Afghanistan, first of all, please lift the sanctions, the devastating sanctions. Those sanctions you imposed on Iran, on Russia, they are not working. Afghanistan is a very poor country. Please lift those sanctions. First of all, what you can do. Secondly, please do not again invade Afghanistan. The British Empire invaded Afghanistan 4 times in 100 years. 4 times. It is very sad. And also, so in 100 years, we had 5 invasions. 3 times the British Empire, 1 time Soviet Union, and the other time NATO, 50 countries of NATO and their allies. Very sad. So please stop invading Afghanistan and leave the country to heal and reconstruct and give the girls of this country to live and to go to school in safety. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Mr. Raoufi. I mean, this is one of the reasons why the Schiller Institute conducts these conferences, because, you know, I think to hear this from you, who speaks for Afghanistan, is extremely important, because the rest of the world, the media, they have no honest coverage of what you just said. But I have to say, we unfortunately have to come to an end. fairly soon, because in 40 minutes, no, in 20 minutes, in less than 20 minutes, our concert starts, which is part of the proceedings of the 2-day conference. But I would like to, have one last question where I would ask people to answer very briefly, and that is a question coming from Koulibaly from France. Do you think that in the context of almost world war, the speeches held during the panel are feasible? Russo-Ukrainian war, tension between China and Taiwan with the maneuvering of NATO countries led by the US. I'm worried and perplexed. This is from Koulibaly from Burkina Faso. So, the war danger, unfortunately, the global war danger, unfortunately, is still with us, very real. So maybe everybody can address that very briefly. Jacques, you want to start?
Yes. From all the proceedings of this conference, something appears very clearly, is that the challenge for us from the transatlantic sector is to become human again. And what we are doing for the advantage of the other, stop sanctions, stop invasions, and create conditions to reconstruct the state and to give to every human being the possibility to stability and peace and common development. This is also something that we do for ourselves. If we don't do that, we accept to become beasts and not human beings. So, in that sense, how we inspire ourselves. And I think that the example given by James Jim Moore from Alaska, and I think when I saw his violin, I thought about Einstein also. There are two persons involved in the physical economy, both him and Einstein in that sense. And they all played and the two of them played violin, and they played Bach. So you see how culture, how the aesthetic development, when you have the possibility to achieve it, inspires you to do the best for humanity, that both in their own ways are doing, or did, or are doing. So you have to create these conditions for us to think and to be able to think with the eyes of the other, to do the best for the other, and create this condition of mutual trust. If we don't do that, we are doomed, as I said before.
I think the best possible answer for this, for the survival of the human civilization, is to go for the human-to-human harmony and keep the development at the heart of that harmony for each and every individual. And second, come out of the inferiority complex. When I say inferiority complex, it means when we say, I am the superior. This is not a superiority complex. This is inferiority complex. If you have to tell somebody you are superior, that means you are not believing you are superior. You are having inferiority complex. Let's try to deal each and every human with the dignity and come out of this inferiority complex. Thank you.
Mr. Raufi, you want to answer that? You're muted.
Sorry for that. Now, as I said, no, I have no comment on that. Thank you for giving the opportunity.
Okay, then I would say, we should, everybody should make concluding remarks, and if you have time, please also tune into the concert, because, after you have 2 days of important reflections, it's always good to uplift the soul by listening to good music from, good composers. But maybe if you want to sum up your reflections or some message you want to give our listeners for the next period?
No, thank you. I think we
Oh,
have already concluded with the last comments.
okay. Jacques, you want to say something?
Yes, let's continue with a chorus of deeds, this chorus of positive and far-reaching interventions.
Well, I want to thank you for your very important thoughts, and I think we should really try to build this idea of a world movement of citizens or world citizens of all countries unite, because I think the fact that the human species is threatened with extinction if it comes to a nuclear war makes everybody legitimately concerned and gives us the authority to activate ourselves. On the other side, I'm really, worried, as the last questioner was expressing, but I'm also extremely optimistic because I think the human person, the human species, is capable of creative reason. And all great thinkers in the past, or not all of them, but many of them, had the vision that humanity would grow together as one. Not that nations would disappear, probably not for a very long time, because culture and tradition are extremely important. The question of sovereignty, of participation in government, these are all extremely important questions. But, my late husband, Lyndon LaRouche, he only touched upon that very briefly. He said that there will come a period in the history of the human species where the idea of the one humanity will be dominant. And I think that that is a thought which makes a lot of sense to me, because if you go into the direction of international space science and space travel, the astronauts, and yesterday we had the greeting from the Russian cosmonaut, when people are together in space on the ISS or other occasions, they always come back and say that they don't see borders, they don't see fights, they only see the one blue planet, which is in a gigantic universe, which has at least 2 trillion galaxies. And we are the one species which have to think about our own, durable existence, our own immortality as a species, which is a big challenge down the road. Not immediately, maybe, but there will become challenges which we only will conquer if we work together as one human species. And actually, many thinkers had ideas about that. Tsai Yuan-pai, for example, the first president of the Beijing University, who brought the aesthetic education concept to China, being inspired by Schiller and Humboldt, but especially by Schiller. He had the idea that eventually there would be the one community of all human beings working in one large community. Friedrich List, came at the same idea from a different perspective. He said that, if infrastructure is being developed around the planet, we will be united by infrastructure in one community. And that's the idea of our report. The new Silk Road becomes the world land bridge, where eventually all continents will be united by tunnels, by bridges. And, I think that infrastructure does have a civilizing effect on the minds of people. So I think the directionality of the human species potentially is very, very good. But as Jacques says correctly, we have to act now. So I can only ask you, join our fight. Don't sit on the fence. Become a member of the Schiller Institute. Work with us. And then I wish you a good time, and hopefully till the next conference very soon. And this is the conclusion of that part of the conference. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.